Why is she feeding my son?
The restaurant was unusually busy that Friday evening, the clatter of plates and the buzz of conversations blending into a steady hum. Expensive perfumes lingered in the air, mixed with the scent of freshly cooked meals, and waiters in neat uniforms weaved in and out of the tables carrying trays. Tolu adjusted her apron, balancing a plate of jollof rice and chicken in one hand while scanning the hall for the table number. She had worked there for nearly 2 years, and every day was the same: long hours, low pay, and customers who often looked down on her because of her uniform. But she endured it with a smile. She had no choice. Her younger siblings depended on her, and every tip she collected went into keeping food on their small table back home in Surulere. That night, however, her attention was caught by something different. At the corner of the restaurant sat a boy, no older than 12, seated in a wheelchair. His bright eyes darted around the hall, curious yet hesitant. A plate of food sat untouched in front of him. By his side, a tall man in an expensive suit glanced at his phone, occasionally looking up at the boy, but saying very little. From a distance, most of the staff whispered about the pair, some murmuring about the boy's disability, others speculating about the man's wealth. Tolu, however, noticed something else: the boy's discomfort. He wanted to eat but couldn't lift the spoon properly. His hands trembled each time he tried, and soon the food was staining his shirt. The billionaire, Chief Oladimeji, sat silently, his expression unreadable. He had seen the way other waiters rushed past, pretending not to notice, offering quick smiles without stopping to help. That was how it always was. People avoided his son, not because they hated him, but because pity made them uncomfortable. But tonight, as he scrolled through his phone, his eyes lifted just in time to catch the sight of Tolu walking toward them. She placed down a bottle of water on the table with a polite smile, but instead of walking away, she bent down to the boy's level. "Would you like me to help you with that?" she asked softly. The boy looked at her, unsure, then glanced at his father. Chief Oladimeji said nothing, only raised a brow, curious about what she would do next. The boy gave a shy nod, and without hesitation, Tolu pulled a chair closer. She gently wiped the food off his shirt with a napkin, whispering, "Don't worry, it happens to everyone." Then she carefully scooped a spoonful of rice and lifted it toward his mouth. The boy hesitated again, but her calm smile reassured him. Slowly, he took the bite, chewing happily as if someone had lifted a burden from his shoulders. Bite after bite, she fed him patiently, chatting with him in between, asking him about his favorite food, cracking small jokes to make him laugh. For the first time that night, his face lit up, and the stiffness in his posture melted into comfort. Around them, other diners looked on, some surprised, others whispering. Tolu ignored it all, her focus only on the boy. From across the table, Chief Oladimeji studied her carefully. He noticed the way she never once showed pity in her eyes. There was no trace of disgust or discomfort, only genuine warmth. She treated his son not as a burden, but as a child who deserved care and dignity. It was something rare, something even money had not been able to buy. His son's caretakers had always been either mechanical or patronizing, but this young waitress, whose uniform was slightly faded and shoes worn out, handled him as though he was the most important person in the room. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, his mind shifting from his phone to the scene in front of him. For years, he had tried to shield his son from the cruel stares of the world, from the whispers of extended family, from classmates who laughed at him during his brief time in school. He had money, influence, and power, but none of it had ever given his boy this kind of joy. And all it took was a poor waitress with tired eyes and a bright heart. Tolu continued feeding the boy until he finished most of his food. She carefully wiped his mouth and offered him water, making sure he was comfortable. The boy giggled at one of her jokes, the sound ringing in the billionaire's ears like music he hadn't heard in years. For the first time in a long while, Chief Oladimeji felt something stir within him, not just gratitude but curiosity, a sense that fate had just staged an encounter he could not ignore. As she stood up to leave, adjusting her tray, The boy tugged lightly at her sleeve. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice trembling with sincerity. Tolu smiled warmly. "Anytime," she replied before walking off to attend to another table. But in that brief moment, the billionaire's gaze followed her, and he knew something extraordinary had just happened, something that would change not only the waitress's life, but his son's as well. The following morning, Chief Oladimeji found himself replaying the scene from the restaurant in his mind. He was a man used to control, used to making decisions with precision, yet the image of the young waitress feeding his son refused to leave him. He had built an empire in oil and real estate, but in that simple act of kindness, he saw something he could not buy. He wanted to understand who she was, not just as a waitress but as a person. That curiosity pulled at him until he made a decision he never imagined he would make. He instructed one of his aides to find out more about her. Tolu, meanwhile, had no idea her actions had caught the attention of the billionaire. After her shift at the restaurant, she hurried to the small flat she shared with her younger brother and sister in Surulere. The electricity was out again, and the humid night clung to the walls. Her siblings, Bayo and Sade, greeted her warmly, asking if she had brought back anything from work. She had saved a portion of her staff meal, splitting it 3 ways and joking that she was already full, though in truth her stomach was empty. After dinner, she reviewed Sade's school assignments by candlelight and then set out her uniform for her next job. At dawn, she would be working as a cleaner in a small office before rushing back to the restaurant for her afternoon shift. The billionaire's aide Kunle reported back within days. He told his boss everything her parents had died within months of each other, her father from a stroke and her mother from a long illness. With no extended family willing to help, she became both mother and father to her siblings, sacrificing her own education to ensure theirs continued. She worked 3 jobs, barely sleeping, but still carried herself with grace. Chief Oladimeji listened silently, the weight of the revelation heavy on him. In his world, people often measured worth by bank balances and pedigree, but this young woman, with nothing in her account, had shown more strength than most of the boardroom giants he dealt with daily. Intrigued, he began to quietly observe her. On different occasions, he sent staff to the restaurant to watch how she treated customers, and the reports always came back the same. She smiled at rude customers, encouraged crying children, and covered for her colleagues when they were tired. Once, she was seen giving her own lunch to a homeless man who wandered into the restaurant begging for scraps. She had little, yet she gave freely. That image alone struck the billionaire deeply. At home, he reflected on how far he had drifted from the values his late wife once embodied. His fortune had built walls around him, shielding him from ordinary struggles, but it had also isolated him from the warmth of humanity. He could pay for the best doctors and caregivers for his son, yet not one of them had been able to give the boy the joy Tolu gave with just a smile and a spoonful of rice. For the first time in years, he questioned whether his money had blinded him to what truly mattered. One Sunday afternoon, he decided to see for himself. Disguising his appearance with a simple shirt and cap, he visited the restaurant without his usual entourage. He sat quietly at a corner table and watched Tolu work. She moved briskly, carrying trays, taking orders, and exchanging small pleasantries with customers. When a colleague tripped and spilled a drink, she rushed to help clean up without complaint, shielding the girl from the angry customer's harsh words. There was no trace of bitterness in her eyes, only patience. To Chief Oladimeji, it was a humbling lesson. Here was a young woman with every reason to be hardened by life, yet she remained gentle. Back at his mansion that evening, he found his son sketching quietly in his wheelchair. The boy looked up, smiling faintly, and asked, "Daddy, will we see the kind waitress again?" The billionaire felt a pang in his chest. His son, who rarely asked for anyone, had remembered her. That alone confirmed what he already suspected, that her presence was more than chance. For days, he wrestled with his thoughts. Pride whispered that he owed her nothing. After all, she was just a waitress. But another voice, quieter yet stronger, urged him to reconsider. He began to think of how wealth without compassion was empty, how his fortune, while vast, had not healed the loneliness in his household. This waitress, with nothing, had given his son a gift that no doctor, no tutor, no caretaker had ever provided: dignity and joy. The more he thought about it, the more he realized this was not just about gratitude. Something deeper was stirring, a challenge to everything he believed about power and status. In her resilience and quiet strength, he saw a mirror reflecting the values he once held before success hardened him. And for the first time in a very long time, Chief Oladimeji admitted to himself that his life, despite all its grandeur, was missing something real. The following morning, Tolu was surprised when the restaurant manager informed her that a customer had requested her presence at a private office in Victoria Island. At first, she thought it was a mistake. She had never been anywhere near that part of Lagos, let alone an office where wealthy men in suits conducted business. Her first thought was that she had done something wrong. Maybe the boy's father from the other night had complained. Fear sat heavily in her chest as she made her way there, her faded handbag tucked under her arm, her heart pounding as she imagined being scolded or, worse, arrested for some mistake she didn't even know she had made. When she arrived at the tall glass building, the security men looked at her curiously before letting her in. She stepped into the elevator, feeling small in her worn shoes, and clutched her bag as the doors opened onto a wide office floor. An assistant led her into a large office where the billionaire sat behind a mahogany desk. The moment she entered, she recognized him instantly, the quiet man in the restaurant who had sat beside the boy in the wheelchair. Her knees felt weak, and she lowered her eyes, expecting a lecture. But instead of the harsh words she braced for, he gestured for her to sit. "You don't need to be afraid," he said gently. "I only wanted to thank you for the way you treated my son." Tolu blinked, unsure how to respond. She stammered, I only did what anyone would have done, sir." He studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "No, not everyone would have done that. In fact, very few people would. I've watched people turn away from him, pretend not to notice him, even those paid to care for him. But you treated him with dignity." Her eyes widened slightly. She never imagined that such a small act had left such an impression. She opened her mouth to reply, but words failed her. The billionaire leaned forward, his tone firm but warm. "I asked about you, Tolu. I know about your struggles, about how you've sacrificed your education to raise your siblings after losing your parents. I know about the long hours you work just to keep food on the table. You've been carrying a weight most people in your shoes would have dropped long ago." Tolu's eyes filled with tears, though she quickly wiped them away. "I didn't want my brother and sister to suffer," she whispered. "They deserve better than what life has given us." Chief Oladimeji nodded slowly, and then he made the offer that would turn her world upside down. "I want to sponsor your education fully. University, any course you choose. I will also provide a new apartment for you and your siblings, so you no longer have to struggle in that cramped space. And when you are ready, I want you to manage a special arm of my foundation, dedicated to children living with disabilities. Someone like you, someone with compassion, patience, and strength, deserves more than to carry trays in a restaurant. You deserve a chance to change lives." For a moment, silence filled the room. Tolu stared at him, unsure if she had heard him correctly. A new apartment? University? A job that could change lives? It all sounded like a dream woven from the very things she had prayed for during countless nights by candlelight. She shook her head in disbelief. "Sir, this is too much. I don't even know how to thank you." He smiled faintly, his gaze softening. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. This is the reward for being who you are. Sometimes kindness opens doors that money alone cannot." Tolu felt her chest tighten, as tears rolled down her cheeks freely now. She thought of Bayo and Said, of the nights they had gone to bed hungry, of the times she had gone without sleep just to make sure they didn't miss school. And now, standing before her, was a man offering everything she had once thought impossible. By the time she left the office, the world outside looked different. The Lagos traffic, the noise of horns, the rush of people, all of it seemed to blur as she walked, her steps lighter than they had ever been. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a young woman whose life had shifted in a single day, whose small act of kindness had reached into the heart of a billionaire and returned to her as a miracle. Back home that evening, when she broke the news to her siblings, they cried and laughed together in disbelief. The future no longer seemed like a dark tunnel, but like a road lit brightly ahead of them. For the first time in years, Tolu felt the weight lift from her shoulders. What began as a simple act in a crowded restaurant had become the turning point of her life, a reminder that no act of kindness is ever wasted. And sometimes, the smallest gestures can lead to the most extraordinary blessings.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more teachable and inspiring tales by CJ.